By the late 1990s, the Cold War was over, and the global consensus was deeply optimistic. We believed that erasing national borders to allow the free flow of capital, goods, and information would naturally lift all boats. The world was treated as a single, open surface, ready to be seamlessly interconnected. 2 decades later, that open world locked down. When a respiratory virus stopped factory production in Asia, hospitals in Europe and North America instantly ran out of basic protective equipment. Physical shipping lines ground to a halt, leaving global industries completely paralyzed. To understand why the supply chain broke, look at this global economy block diagram. The entire system was engineered for one variable: hyper-efficient cost reduction. Corporations moved manufacturing to cheaper labor pools, adopting just-in-time logistics. They erased margins of error, leaving incredibly brittle supply lines. A complex machine running with zero slack leaves absolutely no room for failure. When a crisis hits, an over-optimized system doesn't simply pause, it shatters. The earliest evidence of this fragility actually appeared in July 1997. The Thai government, facing a lack of foreign currency, was forced to float the baht. This map illustrates how a localized currency issue rapidly mutated into a financial contagion. In a deeply integrated market, panic recognized no borders. Investors pulled money out of Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia, sending shockwaves that quickly destroyed wealth in Moscow and Wall Street. Despite this violent global tremor, the push for integration accelerated. With the massive expansion of the internet driving down the cost of global communication, the world economy pressed firmly on the accelerator. Then, in December of 2001, China officially joined the World Trade Organization. Western multinational corporations immediately rushed to offshore their production lines. They built sprawling, highly choreographed supply networks to tap into a massive, highly disciplined, and highly inexpensive labor force. This explosive growth successfully lifted hundreds of millions of people in Asia out of extreme poverty and kept inflation remarkably low in the West. Yet it also stretched the fragile rubber band of the global supply chain to its absolute physical limit. The tension held until 2008, when the heavily deregulated subprime mortgage market in the United States completely collapsed. As massive Wall Street institutions fell, international trade plummeted by the sharpest margin since the Great Depression, and global credit markets instantly froze. This network diagram visualizes a severe architectural failure. The financial instruments built to safely distribute risk across the world had actually masked it. Toxic assets had been seamlessly embedded into the balance sheets of commercial banks, stretching across Europe and Asia. To prevent total systemic collapse, governments were forced to step in and underwrite massive financial bailouts. The costs of these interconnected failures were directly passed on to everyday citizens. The events of 2008 broke the unquestioned trust in free market integration. It became painfully clear that while the immense profits of hyperglobalization were kept by multinational corporations, the catastrophic risks were fully socialized. As the economy slowly limped out of the recession throughout the 2010s, a deep political hangover set in. The hollowing out of industrial towns and decades of stagnant wages bred intense resentment across working-class populations in the West. This severe economic anxiety translated directly into a fierce populist backlash against global institutions. The United Kingdom's shock vote to sever its deep economic ties with the European Union laid bare the intense societal fracturing over integration. By the late 2010s, economists were tracking a clear trend they called globalization. Physical trade growth flatlined, replaced by bitter trade wars, massive tariffs, and a renewed focus on national borders. But while the 2010s saw a slow political retreat, the early 2020s delivered a sudden, violent physical break. Global lockdowns caused by COVID-19 pandemic, quickly followed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, triggered massive disruptions in energy and agricultural markets. Industries worldwide suddenly faced cascading, debilitating shortages of microchips, raw materials, and basic components. The compounding crises forced a terrifying realization. Depending heavily on distant, sometimes openly rival nations for critical resources was no longer viewed as a clever economic calculation. It was recognized as a massive national security vulnerability. Given these massive shocks, it is tempting to declare that globalization has ended. In reality, the entire system is actively undergoing a structural mutation. Returning to our system diagram, we can see the primary directive has shifted. The singular pursuit of finding the absolute cheapest place to produce a good has been replaced by the demanding standard of resilience. Multinational corporations are moving production closer to their consumer markets or relocating entirely to allied nations. Through concepts known as nearshoring and friendshoring, the map of global trade is being rapidly redrawn along strict lines of geopolitical trust. Concurrently, Western governments are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to forcefully rebuild domestic manufacturing capabilities, particularly in critical sectors like high-end semiconductors and green energy technologies. The world remains too deeply connected for isolated nation-states to survive alone. The actual path forward relies on a delicate balance, securing the prosperity driven by digital integration while actively building the heavy physical armor required to weather an incredibly unpredictable world.